this video, I'm going to be building an awesome $2,000 gaming PC build for 2022. Perfect for 1440p gaming at high settings and high frame rates. Featuring a brand new NZXT case, brand new Intel CPU, and this absolutely stunning motherboard from Asus, this jack of all trades PC can literally do it all. And in this video, I'll be talking through all the component choices as we assemble it together and look at performance a little bit later on. Let's do this. Asus RTX 3050 Dual is restocked and reloaded over at Ebuyer.com and currently available for a fantastic price point. If you're looking to get gaming at 1080p high settings in 2022, look no further than Asus's range of restocked and reloaded GPUs now available at Ebuyer.com, linked in the description below. Let's go ahead and kick things off by looking at the processor first up. It's really the heart of any PC build, whether it's for gaming or not, and picking the right one is crucially important. This is Intel's latest and greatest i7-12700KF. This is one of their overclockable i7 SKUs with loads of their latest performance and efficiency cores, plenty of threads, and some great clock speeds. If the speeds aren't quite enough out of the box, don't worry, as it's overclockable and comes unlocked, meaning you can use the latest Z690 motherboards to push it that little bit further. And the board we've gone for today can do exactly that without breaking the bank. This is the Asus ROG Z690A Gaming Wi-Fi. Selecting the perfect motherboard for the latest Intel 12th gen chips can be a tricky endeavour. People come to me all of the time and say, James, do I really need DDR5 memory? What on earth is PCIe Gen 5? And does it matter that my motherboard says Windows 11 ready? We've answered all of those questions and more in a recent write-up over on the website. But in short, no, PCIe Gen 5 is important, and no. For this build, we've gone for a DDR4 motherboard that supports, of course, both Windows 10 and Windows 11, and of course, importantly, has support for PCIe Gen 5. Wow. This board looks visually stunning. The silver, white, black accent mix is just another level. And Asus have killed it with this design. They've got loads of solid Z690 designs, and I'm glad to say this is probably one of my favourites. That's enough of yapping about the motherboard. For now, we're going to go ahead and install the CPU. Find the triangle in the bottom left corner of the socket and pull up your socket's retention arm. Match this up with the corresponding triangle on the bottom left-hand corner of your Intel CPU and then drop the thing into place. Once you're comfortable it's seated correctly, you can give it a very gentle wiggle before popping the socket back down. If you see this little extra notch on the end, you can use this to push it into place with your finger. The black plastic will then pop off, then we can add the retention arm down. Previously, this cover would have flown off when you pop the retention arm down. That's not the case anymore with the new Intel 12th gen chips. Once the processor is in, we can then look at the memory or the RAM for this build. And I've picked up two 16GB DIMMs of Corsair's Vengeance RGB Pro. In particular, this is the RT variant, though any of the three SKUs in this lineup are going to work well. The main reason I picked this one is because of the two-tone black and white aesthetic that fits, as you can see, pretty evidently perfectly with the motherboard design we've opted to go for. We'll be installing these into the second and fourth RAM DIMM slots for dual channel memory. It still gives us two spare DIMMs later for upgrades, very important, and we can install the RAM a little something like so. Not filling up all of your RAM DIMMs is really good advice, and we talked about why in a recent video where you can learn how to future-proof your next gaming PC. Some really interesting stuff in there, and I'd argue RAM is one of the most important points. Looking good in the motherboard already, and a really nice match for the aesthetic we're going to go for. Before wrapping up the motherboard, we have one more stage to go, and then we can look at the case choice and our other components. And that's to actually go ahead and install the storage. This is Seagate's FireCuda 530, our favourite Gen 4 NVMe drive ever. Seagate have absolutely killed it with this release. 7GB on the read and the write with 500 to 4TB capacities available. As if that wasn't enough different options, you can also find it with a heatsink or without. I've gone for the version without one, as our motherboard comes with this nice little heat spreader pre-installed. Now for this stage, you can't use your normal Phillips head screwdriver. This thing is simply too fat to actually work. Instead, you'll need to throw this to one side and pick yourself up a teeny tiny screwdriver, a little something like this one. That will make unfastening the SSD mounting and actually popping the drive in nice and easy. One really important step here as well is to remove this little blue film. This blue film actually protects, if I can get it off. No! Come on! Yes, easy. Never in doubt. Protects like a heat pad that actually creates a nice thermal bond between the SSD and the metal area that we're going to use to dissipate the heat. Slide your drive in at sort of a 45-degree angle. There we go. Clip it in. You'll feel it nicely clip into place and then push it down. You can also see here, we've got this toolless SSD installation, which we can simply push round with our plastic clip before removing yet another pesky blue protection cover. I'm going to do it first time. Oh, yes. And then pop in the M.2 heatsink back into place. Nice and easy. I think that goes in there. Your teeny tiny screwdriver is going to come into its own once again for fastening these two screws down. A little something like so. Easy. Easy peasy. Our RAM, SSD and CPU are all in. And for the next stage of the build, we can go ahead and look at the cooler. Now, my idea for this build was to do something a little bit different. But looking at the cooler, I mean, it looks great. I'm not sure it's going to fit. There's quite a large VRM heatsink, perfect for overclocking, and some large memory as well. So I might have up a bit here, potentially. If I haven't, I'll give you more detail on the cooler in a moment. But first, let's see if it actually fits, and then I'm not going to waste anybody's time, apart from my own. But that's okay. We're here to make these mistakes so you don't have to. Moment of truth time. Actually, maybe. It does. It fits. Oh, go on then. Let's go ahead and remove the two fans, as I think that will make installation significantly easier. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're on to a winner. And this is the Cooler Master MA610P. Now, some people might be confused why we're not going for a liquid cooler. And we have done that in our other build of the NZXT H7, which either you've seen, or you haven't seen, or it's not out yet. But either way, here's what it looks like with a liquid cooler. You've definitely got options in this case. We simply selected the air-cooled route because the 12700K doesn't run all that hot. Plus, with two large fans on, you've got nice amounts of airflow. And for those who are not too keen on installing an all-in-one, this is a great alternative. We'll also be testing CPU temps later, so hold fire and you'll see some data to hopefully back up our decision. For now, we need to take the CPU cooler itself, and we need to take these sort of brackets that look a little something like this. We're going to screw these brackets into the cooler and then pop them through the backplate that comes included. I'm not going to walk you through every step of the CPU cooler process in detail because, to be honest with you, it's quite lengthy. That's double-sided. It's one of these processes in a build. It's actually not that difficult. You've just got to go ahead, read the instructions, and take it step by step. Give yourself about 15 minutes and you'll be done. If you're not after 15 minutes, you've probably got a severe issue, and I can't help with that. Nice. By the looks of things, we got there in the end. I'm going to go ahead and clear the table off and then move the motherboard assembly into the case. For those wondering, we'll have the fans on afterwards once we've gone ahead and screwed it into the chassis. This just makes things a little bit more spacious and easy to get at. The case I've selected in particular is this, the brand new NZXT H7, of which there are three in 2 or 3 different colours each. Let me explain. There's the standard H7 with the non-mesh, non-glass front panel and the glass side panel. There's the mesh H7 with a mesh front panel and glass side panel. And then there's also the Elite H7 with a glass front panel and glass side panel. So the only thing that's really that different about them is the front panel and the included fans you get. I really like the airflow design, but you only get 2 crap fans included, which doesn't make any sense to me for a case that's optimized for maximum airflow. I mean, it's definitely simple. Some would call it a bit boring. I would say it's more clean, but it isn't going to be for everyone. Now, there is probably one concern you do have. James, there's no airflow at the front. Well, don't worry too much because there is a nice big strip of ventilation on the side, although there's no vents on this side or on the bottom. So we are definitely quite limited on airflow here, and we'll have to see how it stacks up in the temperatures later. Do keep in mind, of course, though, they do an airflow version, which is more akin to that market. So it's definitely going to be down to personal preference. As with any case, the next stage is to take off as many side panels as possible, and that will actually make installing the motherboard quite a piece easier. One thing that I have just noticed as I screw the motherboard in is this really cool cable management vent just at the top. Rather than having one or two one-off grommets that are often, let's face it, in the wrong place, you've got one nice large long strip. And if we add in a couple of RGB fans to the top of the case, that should actually help to hide away as well the fact that the gap exists in the first place. An invisible cable management gap is something I can definitely get behind. Finish securing your motherboard into place and then round things off by adding back on the two fans we took off earlier on. Then we're able to go ahead and move on to the next component in this build, the GPU. Asus's tough RTX 3070 was my go-to choice for this build for a few reasons. I wanted something with obviously much more performance than a 3060 Ti, something really capable of 1440p gaming. But the 3080, which is realistically the top-end mainstream card, above that you're sort of into real enthusiast level, is still quite expensive. And I thought the 3070 coming in at around the $500, $600 mark, even under current pricing, actually was a really good fit. Latest pricing and availability can be found at the links below as usual. Now this tough card is one of my favourite designs because it comes in pretty close to MSRP. The only problem you're going to get if you pick up like an Asus 3070 Strix is that by the time you've paid for the Strix cooler, you might as well just buy an RTX 3070 Ti, or heck, put the money towards an RTX 3080 of a cheaper cooler variant. What's more, I think the dark grey is going to fit our build quite nicely. While we've got some RGB in here, it's quite a stealthy design with no exuberant front panel and no major RGB features on the outside of the case, though we might change that on the inside with a couple more additions later on. This is a great opportunity to point out this button on the Asus motherboard. Does it turn it into a rocket ship? No. Does it overclock your CPU with one click? No. Is it a power button? No. It's a PCI release. Your PCI lane is on a cable and you push this and it goes down. Ever struggled getting a GPU out of a PCI slot that's been there a couple of years? You won't have that problem down the road with this Asus motherboard. Maybe they're doing it to make a GPU upgrade easier. I see you're thinking, Asus. I see you're thinking. What we're going to do is we're going to hover the graphics card over the PCI lane that we've just discussed. That's this one here. And that will indicate we need to take off the second and third PCI lane covers. That's these two just here. Unscrew them and make room for your GPU. And then we can slide the card into place and secure it down. What we can then go ahead and do is pop in the power supply, which usually would be the last component, but we've got a trick up our sleeve. So don't go anywhere because we'll be bringing that one out in just a few minutes. Now this right here is the NZXT C750. They've got a C750, 850, 650. They've just released the 1000 watt unit as well. So if you want an all NZXT build, why on earth am I putting the cables back in the box before I've even chose the ones we need? If you want an NZXT power supply for your build, they've very likely got you covered. What we're going to go ahead and do is actually open the cable bag this time and pull out a few of the cables we need to use. With this being a modular power supply, none of the cables come pre-installed, allowing you to pick and choose exactly which ones you want. The first of the ones we want is this, the largest 24-pin motherboard power connection. This is going to make sure our motherboard gets all of the power and juice that it requires, and we're just going to plug the split end, aka the bit where there's two connectors on one side, into the power supply. For the CPU, we're going to do the opposite, taking this 4+4 pin split and plugging the non-split end, labelled PSU, over into the power supply itself. So we're going to pop that in there. Because we've got quite a power-hungry CPU, we also need to dig out a second 4+4 pin CPU power split, as our motherboard requires 16 pins of CPU power connection in total, and we're going to whack that in. We're then next up going to grab ourselves a dual 6+2 pin PCIe power connection. These two 8-pin blocks are going to power up the graphics card. And then last but definitely not least, a SATA power connection. These are great for hard drives or old style SSDs, or any RGB fans or RGB controllers you might go ahead and choose to install. Quite a lot of cables in this build then. We might as well have a non-modular unit with the number we've plugged in. That was just come out. We're going to pop that back in. That's always a good test actually. Once you've got your power supply cables in, give them a gentle tug and make sure none of them come out. If one is not seated quite correctly, you will have problems trying to boot your build up for fairly obvious reasons. Spin the case around to the rear panel where you can see this really nice cable management setup that NZXT have got going on across the whole H7 series, and slide the power supply into the case. We're then going to fasten it down with 4 screws, one in each corner. These screws are the same as what we use to actually fasten the motherboard down, making things nice and simple to follow along with. We can then run the cables up to the respective places, popping these PSU extensions we ordered in the middle. These ones help to tie the build together, and when you're spending quite a lot of money, really make a difference. So add these in to your motherboard, CPU, GPU, and then any other power connections you need to plug up as well. No extensions for the SATA cables, as these are hidden away at the back of the case. And then we can finish things off with this little surprise. These here look like mini Nanoleafs, but they're actually Corsair's IQ ALC 100s. One of them is the starter pack and one is the expansion pack. The starter pack comes with a controller that we need. These are magnetic, and we're going to pop them in our case in a layout that just looks quite nice, adds a bit of something as far as RGB goes. While we're here, we're also going to move the rear fan to the front of the case because it won't be seen, and add some nice RGB fans in at the top and the back. This will help to fill out our rather large H7 and look fantastic, also providing extra airflow too for even better temperatures. Lovely jubbly.
A few moments later.
No, oh no,
Commit, put more on.
It won't go on, they're not wide, it's not wide enough. Oh, you oh no, it's not funny, no! Maybe. That's not gone well at all.
12 seconds later.
Well, my goodness, we got there in the end, didn't we? On that note, we're going to go ahead and boot this PC up and test out the performance. But first, it's time to see how good it looks in an epic GeekaWhat montage. See you in a second, but first, roll that montage. Looking good. We've seen how good our tough 3070 build in one of the new H7 cases looks, but just how good does it perform? Arguably a slightly more important question than that of its aesthetics. Well, the good news is we've tested a wide variety of titles to find out. And as always, we're going to kick off by looking at the summary of all the different results we were able to gather. At 1440p across the board, we saw some great results, while we also tested certain games at 1080p competitive settings. But I'll come on to these. Full runs of all benchmarks can be found on our benchmarking YouTube channel, which I'll pop a link to in the cards section now. Let's take a closer look though, title by title, starting off with Battlefield 2042, walking through all the first-person shooters, racing games, and finishing off with the likes of Fortnite. In 2042, when tested at 1440p resolution, high settings and DLSS enabled, we managed to achieve 112 frames per second on average. We saw good 90 and 99th percentile results too, showing strong and consistent frame rates that really didn't waver all that much. It was once again another great win in COD Vanguard. We're here at 1440p high settings with DLSS once again enabled. We got 175 frames per second on average. This game isn't quite as popular as Warzone, which we'll come on to later, but one thing it does do better is DLSS. Here we gained nearly 70 FPS by enabling DLSS, which is quite an incredible result really, when you think about margins of error and all that good stuff. In Forza Horizon 5, our next title, we use the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode to determine our results. And at 1440p, using the Ultra Settings preset, the run delivered an astonishing 103 frames per second on average. 97 and 88 for the 90 and 99th percentile results gave us some solid numbers too, and the game visually looked amazing. Moving on to Apex Legends next up, here we tested at 1440p high and once again were super impressed. 161 FPS is one of the highest Apex frame rates we've seen in a long time, a game that loves to cap out at 145 frames. Here the 90 and 99th percentile results show consistent numbers too, with MSI Afterburner's Reaver Tuner giving us the FPS graph in the top left and Nvidia FrameView our FPS data in the top right. Moving on to Valorant next up, a game that you wouldn't be surprised to see good frame rates on, but you might be surprised to see over 500 FPS on average. 509 for our average frame rate blew my mind and was more than what we saw oddly on a 3080 Ti. Even still, both cards provided some great results, but to get over 500 frames in Valorant really is going to help to give you that competitive edge and shows that we've got no major CPU or GPU bottleneck in this build. Next up is of course Fortnite. Here we tested at 1080p competitive settings. Once again the frame rate was great, just under half of the frames we got in Valorant, but still over 200 240. 244 on average, with 225 and 200 for the 90th and 99th percentiles. The render distance was superb and the game looked great, so I was very, very happy overall. Finally, to wrap things up, we've also got a bit of COD Warzone. COD Warzone is arguably more popular than the newer COD Vanguard title, and here you're not going to be disappointed once again. 121 frames per second on average, with 109 and 93 for the 90 and 99th percentiles. And with that, that just about wraps it up for this one. If you enjoyed it, make sure to get subscribed, drop a like rating to see more from us. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.